Hello everybody and welcome back to the final video for the PowerWar saga that we've been doing up till now. Um, so last time we left we had something like this, which basically allows us to play 3 streets of poker slash war and then have a quick card assessment. Um, there's a couple of problems with our current game loop in that one, it doesn't restart at the end. And 2, if somebody runs out of health, the game doesn't end. And 3, if somebody runs out of health, it still shows them as having 1 heart. I don't believe we fixed that last time. Also, there are some problems you might not have observed based on the input. So the error that we would see if we ran this on a mobile device would look kind of like this. If we click on a card, it would display as normal, but whenever we tried the second card click, nothing would happen no matter how many times we clicked. It would just keep going and selecting cards without actually playing them. And the key reason for this is that this code right here, as you can see, I commented it out just to simulate this, but um, the left click, even if we go into our project properties and our project settings, even if we are emulating touch from mouse or mouse from touch or whatever, um, obviously I'm running this on a screen, so uh, it will work because I am actually left clicking, but the left click will not work. So there's actually a couple of ways to fix this, but the way we're going to worry about this time is we're just going to modify this so that it takes into account a screen touch event. We actually, the more I researched this and the more I thought about it, I realized that, to tell you the truth, the important thing is that we could keep it how we had it in the project settings and put emulate mouse from touch here, and we could actually change, instead of using this left click, we could just strictly use event is pressed, which counts as basically a left click and a screen touch. But in this case, the way we're doing it, sorry, we're gonna make touchable. Anyway, sorry. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to allow either of those types of events to occur. So the one of the things that I had to do in order to make this work, and one of the reasons why I settled on this method, is by including a timer in it, because for whatever reason, without the timer, no matter how many times I messed with it, with control variables, including this touchable variables, I generally avoid, whenever possible, using timers to control timing of things, but for whatever reason, I could not get it to work without some sort of timer. But in this particular case, we're going to add a touch timer. So going into the card itself, we'll just add a timer, which we'll call touch timer. And this is just going to make it so that it doesn't instantly double click, because that could lead to some severe problems if we're not careful. So on top of that, we have to make sure we declare it, or no, we don't, we're not declaring it. Okay. So yeah, going back here, so touch timer should be spelled exactly the same as that. And now all of this should work. So the touch timer, we're going to set it to wait for 1/4 of a second, so 0.25. And it's all started in the code. So yeah, I think one shot should be on. I don't think it needs to be on. All right, so yeah, I don't think it needs to be on. All right, so the next thing we need to do is connect this timeout onto the card, and all it's going to do is change touchable to true. Yeah, so I tried doing this without the timer, which is the more elegant way to do it, is just look at this touchable variable, and it seemed that no matter how many times I tried it to do it without adding a timer to it, it would always count one click as a double click, which would select and play the card all at once, which is I mean, I could work around it, but at the same time, it's not the way I want the functionality to be. So I was kind of annoyed. I used every trick I knew. But anyway, this should fix that problem, the main input problem that we had with the game. And we should now be able to play this on mobile devices relatively flawlessly. So now we just have to tighten up the game loop and everything should work great. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try to clean up our game loop a bit. Starting with this end round, we're going to make it so that the uh, the game displays what's going down. So we're going to start out by declaring a variable called quip, which is the best name I could come up with it, which is basically going to be the statement that says who won or who was killed by who, if necessary. As you can see, I have a variable called player dead, which we're going to declare. So scroll up top, and where are we? Right here. So after end round, we're going to create two new variables, one called player dead, which is going to equal false, and one called enemy dead, which is also going to be false. All right, so now if we get back down to our end round, that should all be set up good. So the next thing we're going to have to worry about is where we declare whether or not a player is dead or not. So to make all of this work, we're going to go to the player's, the hand script, which controls both the player and the enemy, and we're going to change the set health function. Where is that? Set health, which right now doesn't do much besides change the value in the meta signal. So we're going to actually add another signal in here. Before we declare it, we'll just put the code in here. So we want to make it so that if the player doesn't have any health, so at less than or equal to 0 health, we're going to make sure that it emits a signal, and we're going to call it dead. So going all the way back up to the top, we got to make sure we declare that signal. So signal, we'll put it right underneath this one, dead. So the next thing we have to do is we have to go back into the main scene, and for both of the player and the enemy, we have to make sure we connect these signals. So we'll connect that to the main, and we'll connect that to the main. And now that we have both of those, it's just a matter of changing the appropriate variables. So player dead equals true, and enemy dead equals true. And let me see, the end war timeout. We're going to change this one too. So everything's good up to here, and after that, we're going to check to see. So the next thing it's going to do is going to check to see if the player dead or the enemy is dead, and if either of those is true, it's going to end the round. So this will be the place where we decide whether or not to end the game during the wars at the end war timer. Everything else will work exactly the same, and if we're past the river, we'll still switch to the poker evaluate stage of the game. So to follow this logic a bit, so if war ends, which will happen if somebody has 0 health, or if we hit the river. We'll either go to poker evaluate or to end round. So if we go to end round, it's going to look through. If player's dead, it'll say you were killed by the enemy.name. If the enemy's dead, it'll say you killed enemy.name. And yeah, so if the equip does not equal blank, which is what it would be there, it will send the quip. So one of those things. And otherwise it'll display game over. The reason it runs like this is because it'll say game over no matter what if it gets to the end round, but after poker evaluate, when it does the evaluate hand, it'll calculate the winner, and the calculate winner function will print whoever is winning. So the important thing here is while we did improve our UI, we didn't completely fix it. So if we're going to go back into the UI for the still running function, which I don't believe works properly on here. So if you may recall, yeah, I don't even have that in here. If you may recall, we'd set this up so that all of our UI messages get put into a queue, which is just a simple array of strings, and then it just goes through them one at a time. But there were a couple of mistakes that were made, so I've improved the design a bit. And also, while we're here, we're going to fix another mistake that was made that made it so that it will never display 0 hearts. So the first thing we're going to do is after send alert here, we're going to actually create a function called still running. And the way this works is if the size of the queue doesn't equal 0, or the animation player is still playing. Which I don't know, that's probably redundant to put is equals true, but we'll just leave it. We'll return true. And if not, we'll return false. And this is just a check to make sure that everything's running, whether everything's running or not. And other than that, the one thing that we're definitely going to change here. So right now, the player health is a factor of 16 because that's how wide the sprite is. If we go into the scene, if we go into the 2D scene here, sorry, it's not in there, it's in the UI. If we go into the UI scene, we'll see each of these are 16 pixels wide, basically, right? So 16, 32, 48. So essentially, each of them is a factor of 16. Let's go back to script here, and where are we? So right now, in order to determine the rectangle size of the hearts, it's a factor of 16 times the value plus 1. I'm not entirely sure why I added 1 to it, but we'll go with that. But for whatever reason, it says if value is less than or equal to 18, 18 being a kind of an arbitrary number that's just slightly above 16. I guess the cover is 17 there. Anyway, I don't know what I was thinking because the value should actually be relative to the amount of health. So in this case, if is less than or equal to 0, we want it to hide health. Otherwise, sorry, if it's less than, yeah, hide health. Hide health. Yeah, anyway, according to my sample project, hide health equals false, else, which logically doesn't sound right, but I'm sure that I screwed up how hide health works, and that's why it works like this. Anyway, this will fix the bug that makes it so that it does not display 0 health. So all we have to do is change those to 0, and everything else should work good, and we'll have to reverse these for whatever reason. So we just have to get a good scenario going where we have 0 health. Just a sec. All right, so here we are on the last card. Wizard wins. We're down to 0 health. We were killed by the wizard. Game over. Good to go. And we get a nice little restart here, which I also programmed into the game loop in case I didn't mention that earlier. So if we go back into the script for main, we'll see I use the variable error equals get tree reload scene. We could actually just, we don't necessarily have to use that. We could just use get tree reload current scene. It'll work just the same. But basically it makes it once we get to the end round, assuming that the UI is no longer running, so it's displayed all the messages, it'll just restart the screen, thus completing our game loop. So yeah, that's basically it. As far as the main stuff goes, obviously, my intent was to originally expand this. There were multiple opponents and possibly an off-screen map that showed you going to, the 3 or 4 different challenges before you got all the stuff that you needed, and a couple of other functionality bits that I never got around to. But it really showed me the importance of keeping your scope low when doing a game jam game, that's for sure. To tell you the truth, the hardest part wasn't developing all the card development stuff and everything. It was strictly doing the assessing hands thing, and ultimately the thing that we didn't even get to in this video, developing the AI, because poker is kind of a complicated game. And, if you're not using a reference, if you didn't have a library lying around for that AI or for that kind of card evaluation, it could really kill a ton of your time. One of the things we're not going to get into in this video series is going through the debugging of the project. Most of the yellow ones are actually pretty easy to sort out. For example, the ones here that say the delta is never used, prefix with an underscore, you really just have to follow the instructions. The yellow ones are all pretty easy. The best hand, we can see that it's used, just not in the block, and it's not used at all in this part of the block. So we could actually just move this down into the for loop, and that should work just fine. And yeah, same with this. Like all these not is declared but never used in the block. It just has to be moved into the block of code that it's being used in, the indent level where it starts getting used at. It's kind of a pointless error because everything works exactly as intended, but it's worth mentioning. The harder ones to get through are a lot of these tween things. I played around with this a bit, and I actually could not clear this error myself. And if anybody has any insight, I would love to hear it. But at the same time, the project currently works relatively stably on all the platforms or both platforms that I've tested. And because of the scope of the project, I don't want to spend too much time trying to fix that error. Especially these tweens not being part of the scene tree. I don't understand why that's happening because they're definitely there. And there's another one too, the active card being already connected, etc. I'm not 100% sure why it's doing that because initialization should cover it, but I didn't investigate it. There is a chance I accidentally already connected that method active card within the card object itself, which is a possible reason for it. But let's see. Yeah. Yeah. So other than that, I none of these errors are that critical, and it's such a small project that at some point you have to decide whether or not it's worth it to debug everything that's in through here. Another couple of notable ones that I figured out how to solve is yeah, the card holder one. This is probably occurring because the table, I believe, uses the hand script. Yeah. So because of that, you'll notice it does not have a card holder on it. So if you put a card holder in there, it will just magically work. Yeah. So that's as far as we're going to get into as far as debugging all of the errors in here. Um, like I said, right now it's working as intended, and if I was honestly paying attention, I would have started attacking these a lot of these as they appeared. But um, I went through a pretty quick development cycle of this, so and I'm still learning how to debug some things like some of these weird tween errors shouldn't be happening because there are exceptions built into the tween methods, the tween functions that should not allow those errors to happen. Um, but they happen anyway, so c'est la vie, everything's stable. So here's where we're going to conclude the series. I really had the main goal of just getting this as a complete game loop. In a perfect world, this game would continue being developed so that there could be maybe multiple opponents in an AI. But like I just said, developing an AI for a poker game is actually um, very difficult, depending on the level of intelligence you want to give the opponent. In this particular type of game with no actual betting hands type thing, it's probably a little bit easier. Um, there's not the same amount of aggression in that play, but being able to have an AI that decides whether or not it's worth playing a high card to win the war round or to keep its cards because it makes a winning poker hand is still a pretty difficult thing. So basically, this is it. I think for polish, I'm going to, outside of the series, add a couple of sound effects to the cards being dealt, and I'm going to publish this up on itch for anybody that wants to download and play the final version. I'll probably post the source code for that as well. In a future video, I hope to talk about how I manage audio for sound, but I don't plan on tackling that in this series, that's for sure. So I hope everybody enjoyed this, and particularly anybody developing a card game that's new to Godot learned a couple of methods for doing that sort of thing. Thanks very much, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.